Not too long ago, I was telling you guys that we are not going to get Medicare for all on a national level anytime soon. And where did I come up with that decision? Well, based on the fact that you have a minority leader in the House who doesn't approve of it. You have progressive. You have politicians that are part of the progressive caucus that don't agree with it. So you don't have the votes in the House. You definitely don't have the votes in the Senate, especially as long as Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are there. And then you have Joe Biden as president who said if it came across his desk, he would veto it. Some people didn't like me saying that, and they said that I was being cynical. Sorry. You want me to keep it real, or you want me to lie to you? Because now it's not just coming from me. Now it's coming from Bernie Sanders himself. So on the thumbnail, it said Bernie Sanders says no. And I said, what is he saying no about? By the way, this was pretty recent. This was published February 8th. That was just a week ago. We ain't going to get it. Why Bernie Sanders says his Medicare for all dream must wait. This is an interview with Bernie Sanders. I don't think a lot of people have talked about this, so I really wanted to highlight this because you guys need to hear the truth. And I'm not going to sugarcoat things for you. There's Bernie. Here we go. After railing at the injustices of U.S. healthcare for decades, Senator Bernie Sanders in January became the new chairman of Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. The job gives the healthcare industry's biggest Washington nemesis an unprecedented opportunity to shape healthcare reform in Congress. Sorry, I just wanted to make it bigger for you guys. But the sort of radical changes he seeks could prove elusive. Even Sanders concedes there are limits to the power of his position. Let's go straight to the interview here. The radical changes Sanders seeks could prove elusive. During an interview with KHN at his Senate office recently, the independent from Vermont spoke about the prospects of lowering drug prices, expanding access to primary care, and his ultimate goal of Medicare for all. The interview has been edited for length and clarity. Thank you for that. What do you hope to achieve as chair of the HELP committee in terms of legislation, but also messaging and investigations? This is Bernie's response. What I ultimately would like to accomplish is not going to happen right now. We have Republicans controlling the House, and many of the views that I hold, including Medicare for all, I think if we had a vote tomorrow, we'd get 15 to 20 votes in the Senate and would not win in the House. I realize that, but I happen to believe our healthcare system is dysfunctional. Let's talk about the House. Because Bernie says we have Republicans controlling the House. What I want to mention to you is that even when the Democrats controlled the House last year, Medicare for all still wasn't going to pass. This was some of the argument the other side gave about force the vote, was that no, don't do it because it's not going to pass. Now, that wasn't the purpose of force the vote, but we're not going to get into that whole show about that. Okay. But the point that I'm trying to make is that Bernie Sanders is leaving that part out in his answer. Yes, you have a Republican controlled House, but you had a Democrat controlled House that also wasn't going to approve Medicare for all. It wasn't going to pass under them either. You didn't have the votes then. Bernie didn't have the votes for Medicare for All to pass in the House when he ran for president in 2020. Now, I'm going to show you a video clip, and it might trigger some of you. You might get a little trigged. But it's someone who predicted this. 3 years ago, they called this out. And it's not someone that I'm a huge fan of. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's go on. We spend twice as much per capita on healthcare as other countries, and 85 million people have no insurance or are underinsured. It is a dysfunctional system that, to my mind, needs to be fundamentally changed to a Medicare for all system. But we ain't gonna get it. Somebody take a whoosh, screenshot of this. I don't want to brag about this. I don't want to brag about being right. I don't. But I want you to see this, because now it's coming from him. It's not coming from me this time. It's not coming from Joe Biden. It's coming directly from Bernie Sanders telling you we ain't gonna get it. Let's go on. What can you actually accomplish? From a poll a couple months ago, just among Republicans, top concern, high cost of prescription drugs. We're long overdue to take on, in a very bold way, the greed and outrageous behavior of the pharmaceutical industry. Here's another question. So many parts of the system are messed up. Patents, 340 billion pharmacy benefit managers, insurance issues with formularies. And he says, right, there are a million parts to this problem. They go on to ask, so short of a complete overhaul, what are the parts you think you can change? Now listen to this part. Every year, the U.S. government, through the National Institute of Health, spends tens of billions of dollars on research. The Moderna jab was co-developed between Moderna and NIH and received billions of dollars in assistance, guaranteed sales, and you know what's happened in the last couple of years. The CEO of Moderna is now worth $6 billion. All the top executives are worth billions, and now they're threatening to quadruple prices. This is a company that was highly supported by taxpayers of this country, and that's one example of many. What is the responsibility of a drug company that receives very significant support, financial support, intellectual support for research and development to the consumers of this country? Right now, it is zero. Thank you very much for your support. I will charge you any price I choose. We have to end that. That's the starting point. So again, the question was, what are the parts you think you can change? We know the history, Bernie. We know this because you've been saying this for a long time. But when it comes to what he can change, he just basically says like, well, the prices. Right now, it is zero. Thank you very much for support. I will charge you any price I choose. We have to end that. So he's saying we have to end pharmaceutical companies charging any price that they choose. He said that's a starting point. But my question is, how are you going to do that, though, Bernie? So apparently that was their question, too, because they followed up with, but what's the mechanism? March-in rights, whereby the government could force a company to share its license for a drug that was developed with federal investment, allowing others to produce it? Question mark. Bernie goes on to say that is one approach. Threatened by people, threatened by people in George W. Bush's administration, by the way, March-in is one option. Reasonable pricing is another. I have made 2 trips to Canada, once as a congressman from Vermont, took a bunch of working class women across the border to buy a breast cancer drug. Once as a presidential candidate, took people from the Midwest and we bought insulin. The price was 1/10 of the US cost in both cases. Another area is primary care. I have worked hard with other members of the Affordable Care Act and the American Rescue Plan to significantly expand community health centers, FQHCs, federally qualified health centers provide primary care, dental care, mental health counseling, and low-cost prescription drugs. And 1/3 people in Vermont get primary care through community health centers. So this is another problem I've seen too, is that these community health centers, some of them have been closing or they've been laying off people, shutting people down. It's unfortunate, but then he goes on to say, they talk about patents and trademark, other priorities, the crisis in the healthcare workforce. We don't have enough doctors, nurses, dentists, mental health counselors, pharmacists. The nursing crisis is enormous. We have a hospital in Burlington, moderate size by the national standards, largest by far in Vermont. They told me they are going to spend $125 million on traveling nurses this year. But one of the reasons for the traveling nurses too, not just in reference to Vermont, because I have a friend who's a travel nurse, is because when nurses go on strike, guess who the hospitals call to come in and fill those spots? The travel nurses. My friend has done a couple of those. One moderate-sized hospital. Meanwhile, we have young people who want to become nurses and we can't educate them. We don't have enough nurse educators. I think we get bipartisan support for that issue. Another thing I want to look at is dental care. Not enough dentists, too expensive. Whole regions don't have them. Listen to this part, and then I'm going to go to the video clip. Did you agree with President Biden's decision to end the public health emergency in May? It says he frowns here. I have some concerns. Sanders appeared to be the only member of Congress wearing a mask during Biden's speech on Tuesday. It's going to dump a lot more people into the uninsured again. This is another thing. Some people that were clapping when Joe Biden was saying we've lifted the health emergency, I don't think they really understood what they were clapping for. Because now that that has happened, that means people who were covered under the emergency status are no longer covered anymore. Those people are now uninsured again. Now, there was someone, you're really going to laugh at this one because I had to go way back. I had to go way back. And this is someone who is local to me. There was a commentator 3 years ago tried to warn us that this was not going to happen, that Medicare for All was not going to happen anytime soon. And the name of this video is Medicare for All isn't happening soon. They're local to me. I don't watch their stuff much anymore, but he was right about this. Listen to this.
I hate to have to start this way today after the Thanksgiving holiday, but if you're watching on YouTube at least, wait, please don't hit the dislike button just yet. Consider watching this video first before you do that. I am here to talk about the unfortunate reality that a national Medicare for All is not happening anytime soon, and I'll explain why. And I'm not here as an opponent of Medicare for All. I'm not someone who wants it to fail. I'm an advocate of Medicare for All, but I'm also an advocate of being realistic with you if we want to make things happen. And the reality is that without me attacking Medicare for All, without me attacking the concept of Medicare for All, I recognize that national Medicare for All isn't happening anytime soon. I'm not here to say we should advocate for centrist policies that are more realistic. That we should advocate for the policies we think are the right ones, and the right progressive policy is Medicare for All.
Anthony. Anthony said, why? He was right. He was right. I know it's painful, guys. I know. But listen, he has a point.
But I'm not here to tell you unrealistic things. Like if Bernie gets elected, we'll have Medicare for All in 4 years. We won't, and I'll explain why in a second. Our politicians do enough of the unrealistic stuff. I'm here to discuss the realities. And I'm here to tell you today that because national Medicare for all simply isn't happening anytime soon, even if the next president supports it, we need to be smart. So let's go through this piece by piece. And once we're done, rather than, calling me a shill or whatever.
Because he knew that was coming. David knew that was coming. That's why he said, rather than calling me a shill. So anyway, something I want to point out that he just said was that even if we have a president, so he was saying 3 years ago, even if Bernie Sanders was to win, he was saying we still weren't going to get Medicare for all. That's what he was trying to tell people. Not if Joe Biden won. Even he said if Bernie won, we weren't going to get it. Listen to this. I know it's tough, you guys.
Tell me where you think I'm wrong on the reasoning, because that's really what this is about. It's about talking about the facts and reality. Number one, I've already talked about some of the areas of concern around Medicare for all plans, but that's not really what this segment is about. Yes, I've talked before about how most of the plans for how to pay for Medicare for all are unrealistically optimistic about how much healthcare spending per person will go down if we switch to Medicare for all. In reality, it could take 10 or even 20 years to see those cost reductions. I've talked about that before. That's not what I'm talking about today. There are political considerations. Even if Democrats take the Senate in 2020, which would be by the slimmest of margins, as I've outlined for you before, it's not going to be enough to pass Medicare for all. Because number one, even if Democrats do take the Senate by a few seats in 2020, you need 60 votes in order to pass something like Medicare for all, which Democrats are not going to have after this upcoming election.
He was right about that.
And not all Democrats even support Medicare for all in the Senate. You can then look at 2022, but then if you're only starting the conversation, then again, you still need 60 votes in the Senate to pass this. It's a question mark whether Democrats could even get a 60 vote majority in 2022. And of course, the alternative would be get rid of that 60 vote requirement. You can do that with a 1-seat majority, but even Bernie Sanders has hesitated to say we should get rid of that 60 vote requirement because it could massively backfire if Republicans take control again, when Republicans take control again. So that's a serious political obstacle. Doesn't matter whether Bernie's president or Warren's president or whoever. It's just a real obstacle. And then imagine that you solve that problem.
See what he said? It didn't matter. It didn't matter if Bernie Sanders, this is one thing that I hate to admit, but this is one thing that Joe Biden was correct about when he debated Bernie Sanders. And he said, Bernie, you don't have the votes. He said, you don't have the votes for it to pass. He was right about that. He was right. So there's that piece right there. So he was letting you know, even if Bernie Sanders won, we were not going to get Medicare for all. Let's go on.
Problem. You have some bigger issues to deal with. We have a conservative Supreme Court. We are going to have a conservative Supreme Court for some time. Why does that matter? When we talk about Medicare for all, two different reasons. Number one, if you don't make private insurance illegal, as some want to do, it significantly hurts the financial viability of Medicare for all. Making private insurance illegal would be almost impossible under the current Supreme Court or any Supreme Court that's like it. It will be fought endlessly by moneyed interests up to the Supreme Court. This is not a Supreme Court that will say private insurance is now illegal. It's just not going to happen. And that is something that will hurt the financial viability of Medicare for all. And
reason number two, and this was one I did not think about, the Supreme Court. He got me on that one. That was one that I really did not think about. Hey, I'm not perfect. I didn't think about that one. Let's go on.
Realistically, will make it not happen politically. Issue number two, you aren't going to be able to force doctors to accept Medicare for all. Many doctors will choose to accept private insurance because, again, it's not going to be illegal. And you will see more of a move to what's called self-pay. We already see self-pay more and more in the mental health field. We see it in dentistry because dental insurance is terrible in the United States. We could spend much longer on this Supreme Court issue. But again, There is no way that a Supreme Court that is even remotely like the one we have right now would rule doctors have to accept Medicare for all.
This is the piece, like, it's painful to hear, I know, guys, but like this is one thing that he was correct about. JB says, of course, private insurance is illegal under capitalism. If we change the economic system, that may not be an issue. 100%. 100%. Yep. Again, I hate to say it, but it all goes back to capitalism.
That will be a major problem for the financial viability of Medicare for all, but it won't even get to that because it is not going to be something that you will get 60 votes in the Senate for under these parameters. So what I want to talk about is not that I think Medicare for all is bad. I think it's good. I like it. I do see it as a drastic and maybe the best improvement over the system that we have. I don't want to suggest to you that it doesn't matter if a candidate supports Medicare for all. It does. We should support candidates who see Medicare for all as the gold standard and who see it as the goal. But you and I have to be realistic that it's not happening anytime soon. So before we even talk about candidates, let's talk about what could happen. Number one, it's important to get some wins that demonstrate that conceptually Medicare for all or something like it would work.
This piece right here, it's important to get some wins. This is something like JB and I have talked about before, the fact that we haven't really had wins, like on the left, we really haven't. And I think this is why some people have become, more pessimistic, or there's more like infighting, like that kind of thing. But it's true. We need wins. We need to win something. I can't believe, what's weird? I had to go all the way back. I had to go back to David Pakman to get this information. He was trying to warn people 3 years ago, we were not going to get it, whether Bernie won or not. Let's go on.
These include, and this is so lame, I'm almost like going to throw up in my mouth a little bit saying it. We need to support some version of a public option as an eventual point that we get to. I said during Obamacare, Barack Obama should have started the negotiation for Medicare for all so that at minimum we end up with a strong public option. We didn't. He started with the public option and we ended up with just a massive handout of tens of millions of new customers to for-profit insurance companies. I know it's so lame and milquetoast to talk about a public option. And as I said before, all the public option will do is, estimates say it'll reduce the cost of private insurance by 7 to 9% because of its impact on the market. But if we end up with the best possible version of a public option, ideally it will work well because it will be properly set up and funded. We can then point to it and say, look, that was an improvement. Let's keep going to the next step. That's number one, but that's not all. Number two, it might be possible to make a change to the Medicare eligibility age, which won't totally rock the boat. Like, for example, lowering the age to 60 or maybe to 58. This is actually step one in some people's plans for Medicare for all. Elizabeth Warren, for example, has talked about let's lower the eligibility age, better said, in steps. And that might actually be a viable first step. There would probably have to be some kind of trade, though, because, again, even many Democrats in the Senate don't support Medicare for all.
Lowering the age. See, this piece right here, the thing about lowering the age, it's like, you got to think about all the kids, like all the children who are sick and their parents don't have health insurance. Children, they're dependent on their parents or their guardian. So if their parent doesn't have health insurance, then the child most likely is not going to have any type of health insurance. So it's like, even if you were to lower the age from, like, let's say 65 to 45, that would be a reach for a lot of them that are in DC. If you're a parent at 25 and you have a child, like, your child is still not going to be covered. So that's the thing. And they're not going to lower the age all the way down to like 5 years old. They're not going to do that. That's the thing.
That's not going to change in 2020, and it's unlikely to change in 2022. Third, and this is to me the most exciting, what about state single payer? Vermont wanted to do this, but it ended.
Okay, Colin, that's the answer to your question. Is David indirectly making the case for pushing Medicare for all on the state level? Let's hear what he says, Colin. Let's hear what he says about this.
Up failing for a variety of reasons that we could explore in a different segment. If Medicare for all succeeds at the state level, a serious conversation about national Medicare for all would hopefully be able to start. Obamacare mirrored years later in many ways the Romney care system that started here in Massachusetts. It falls way short of being what we want. But the point is, state level success can actually push nationally implementing some of these policies. So
there you go, Colin. Colin, there's your answer. There you go. There you go. There you go. You can watch the rest. It's a longer video, but again, I just wanted to share this with you guys because this video is 3 years old. Like it just, let me come to more. I hate how when you go up here, they put, yeah, this was December 2nd, 2019. So David Pakman, as much as I hate to admit it, and no, I have never met David Pakman. People ask me this a lot because we both live in the Boston area. I've never met him, like not in person, not virtually, anything like that. But I had to go all the way back to a David Pakman video to show you that even back in 2019, somebody in independent media was trying to tell you that it wasn't going to happen, even under a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren presidency. I had to go back to Dave. I'm going to go to some of the comments here. What do you guys think about that? What do you think about the statement that Bernie Sanders made in that interview? What does this tell you? Bernie Sanders said, you ain't going to get it. That came from his mouth. Killior Gorgie says, I believe Pakman was on Jimmy Dore years ago. I think so. I think he was. Thank you for the super chat, Cryosynth. Bernie is blaming Republicans again when he knows that Democrats who pledged will stab us all in the front and the back. Exactly. He left that out of the conversation, out of the interview. Hope you guys noticed that as well. Killier Gorgie says, I believe, the Oracle, you can't get wins when you can't get candidates who will advocate for working class interests.